So I ended up taking a bit of a break for the last week in terms of uploading. Destiny content is kind of slowing down, and to be honest, I didn't quite know how to follow up my last video, as I was really proud of that and thought it was pretty great. So I had a bit of a mental block in terms of what to talk about next. Again, there's not a whole lot of new Destiny content. We're at that place where there's not much more new things to talk about, but that being said, that's a good opportunity to start having some meta-analysis videos and some general discussions. And today I want to have a discussion about the definition of skill in Destiny 2 and how I think of this and how exactly that's shifted over time. And I want to talk about this now more than ever because I see a lot of people that are quite discontent with the strength of abilities currently, most commonly stasis. I think of skill in Destiny as divided into 4 parts. We have your mechanical skill, which is your ability to aim well and land shots, your decision making, which is things like positioning, team shooting, and awareness, and then there's mechanics mastery, so your knowledge of interactions in Destiny, like what resilience might someone have and how does that counter your build, or maybe even your ability usage and when to use your abilities, mastery of the mechanics of the game. And then finally, there is deck building, your ability to make a creative and strong loadout that either is very powerful or counters the meta in some way. I personally respect every facet of skill I just mentioned, every category, and I think the best players in the game, while some of these will take you further than the others, do have a firm grasp, ideally, on all of them. But that might not always be the case. There's going to be players that are stronger in one category than another category. Like maybe my mechanical skill or decision making isn't as strong as some of the best players in the game, but I know my mechanics and mastery of interactions in the game and deck building allows me to make up for that a bit. The internal problem I face right now, and this is just an opinion of course, is I feel that a lot of the community doesn't entirely respect all these categories as valid skills that are just as important as one another in Destiny 2, whereas some of these skills like mechanical skill and decision making should be heavily prioritized over the other skills. And as much as that is a valid opinion to have, I think that we need to shift our mentality on that, as I don't believe Destiny is that game that is focusing solely on aim and decision making, even though it's still a big part of it. I make plenty of comparisons to this in a lot of my videos, but I really think that Destiny as a first-person shooter is incredibly similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! As a trading card game in some weird way. And it's okay if you don't have knowledge of this, I'll explain. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a similar set of skills. They have their technical play, which is similar to mechanical skill and of course decision making, but they also have that aspect of mastery of every single interaction, knowing what you can use and when you can use it, and what things counter what things, and good and bad matchups, and having mastery of the mechanics of the game and all the interactions also lets you know when you should be using something at the most highly influential and impactful time. And lastly, as a card game, of course, it has deck building, where if you are innovative enough and able to counter the meta in some way that no one's expecting, or push it forward and innovate more than other people, you could end up just winning a tournament because of that. But of course, you need all of these skills to really be successful regularly. Aside from a similar set of skills, like Destiny, Yu-Gi-Oh's cards have very powerful individual ability, meaning a single card can be insanely impactful, whether that be countering your opponent and demolishing them with some sort of disruption in their play, or being very, very aggressive. Or sometimes a card can lead to a massive combo that, if that goes uninterrupted, pretty much means you lose the game. It's incredibly hard to beat. I think this compares to Destiny in the form of exotic weapons and our subclass tree abilities. The exotic weapons and subclass tree abilities, now more than ever, especially with stasis, have the potential to be insanely impactful. However, I think there's a good portion of the community that sees some exotic weapons or abilities as cheese because it's not following just the core gunplay like on legendary weapons per se. Back in year 1 of Destiny 2, although it wasn't perfect, and regardless of our opinions on that, I really heralded mechanical skill and decision making as the most important skills, and I believe they were the most emphasized in the sandbox. Abilities were weaker, shooting and primary weapon play was more prevalent. Again, not saying it's perfect, but at the time, that is what I found to be the most important and the most impactful. Whereas now we've shifted since then to have mechanics mastery in interactions as well as deck building to be probably just as important. I used to have the mentality that Destiny should be about gun skill and it's an FPS, and I think that's a fine opinion to have until I figured I should stop banging my head against a wall because it's very apparent that it's not just about that. And I had this realization mid to late year 2, and I remember talking to Cammy about it where I said, if we're gonna keep playing this game, we can't keep complaining about whatever abilities and whatnot it has, because Destiny is now more of a deck building game, where yes, mechanical skill and decision making are still going to be as important as ever. However, someone can beat you simply because they have a better built deck than you do. And when I say better built deck, obviously I mean a better built loadout, one that's honestly just better than yours, or one that counters yours and has a better matchup against you, because there's good and bad matchups now. I found it very apparent that Destiny was shifting away from just the gunplay aspect being as important, and if I didn't like that, if I didn't want to play that and no longer found it enjoyable, then I probably should find another game to play that does promote just that. But honestly, looking at the game differently and treating it more like a deck building kind of card game FPS type thing has greatly increased my enjoyment of it, and I think about the game a lot differently, and again, I just find it a lot more fun in that regard. But when weapons and abilities are insanely strong and individually impactful, especially like they are now with Stasis, where does the skill come in? From what I can see, a lot of the community doesn't associate skill with utilizing abilities to secure kills. They see skill as one-on-one gunplay or shotgunning, sniping, etc., something having to do with just focusing on your weapon. But again, I don't think that's the game Destiny 2 is, or at the very least is anymore. Destiny 2 is basically very much like the card game I play, putting together your best, most synergistic bullshit, I'm gonna call it, for lack of a better term, that relative insane level of power. Put together your best bullshit and use your bullshit better than someone else can use their bullshit against you. And besides your mechanical skill and positioning or decision making, the skill becomes your knowledge of interactions. What works against what, and what is truly the best time to be using what ability in the best scenario where it's going to be the most impactful. All because you use an ability doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get a kill, and even if you get that kill, it might not be at the most impactful moment. And even more than that, I think the biggest skill in Destiny at the moment is knowing how to play around and having the awareness to play around all the potential other forms of bullshit that you're going to be facing, like let's say a shatter dive. And again, that's very similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! As a card game. A lot of the skill in doing these insane combos and utilizing these highly impactful cards isn't simply just playing them when you get the opportunity, but thinking about all of the different things that you have to play around that someone can do to disrupt you to stop you from getting the most impact out of those plays. And as I mentioned, I think this is an insanely big skill in Destiny as well. When you engage someone, you should be thinking of all the potential ways that they have to throw their bullshit at you. If I'm going against a hunter again, I have to think to not stay too close, or at least bait the radar to try and get him to shatter dive before I push to clean up a kill. Or think to myself, if I'm standing around a pole that is somewhat close in proximity, that they can use a dust field nade to pop me out of that. So I have to be thinking about all the potential plays that they have to kill me, and then play around their bullshit. And once I'm successfully able to play around the most things possible, and you're not always going to be able to play around everything, but you play around as much bullshit as possible, you can then use your bullshit to then counter them and be successful and win. Or, you know, sometimes that's the other way around. Sometimes you want to use your bullshit immediately in the best scenario possible because it is the right scenario, where it will have a tremendous amount of impact for your team. My point is, I see the skill in Destiny right now being less about gunplay. Again, that's still very important. However, gunplay and decision making and positioning is always going to be important. Those fundamentals will always be core to the game. However, mechanics mastery, knowing your interactions, building the best loadout you can that you feel good about, and taking that and when in game, playing around the most things that you have to play around and predict as possible, playing around all of the potential bullshit your enemy might have, and then using your bullshit better than they can against you, is the skill of the game, in my opinion at least. What I find though is some players have a different definition of what the quote-unquote bullshit is, or things that don't take skill are. And when I say bullshit, I mean like anything in the game. It's just any sort of abilities, any weapons, exotics, things they have to throw at you. I don't mean something taking more skill than another thing. I'm just using a broad term to represent the insanely high level of power of things in Destiny. The way I look at it is nearly everything in Destiny is at this similar level of power that is pretty crazy and part of the bullshit. I personally don't see weapons, whether it be a hand cannon, shotgun, exotic, or whatever, as any different from abilities, and to me, honestly, I think they're all just part of the bullshit. Aiming in this game for an FPS player that's experienced isn't exactly the most difficult thing ever. Of course, mechanical skill does still matter and feels very satisfying in this game, but to me, I see everything at a relative level of power that is insanely strong across the board, and nothing is incredibly difficult individually. I feel like a lot of the difficulty comes more so from what I said earlier, which is the mechanics mastery, knowing interactions, knowing when to do what, when's the best scenario to do what, and knowing everything you have to play around and playing around it successfully. I mentioned this earlier, but I kind of want to wrap this rant together in some way somehow. I feel like the community right now really respects mechanical skill, your ability to aim, decision making or movement, very highly, but not at all respects mechanics mastery, knowing interactions, good ability usage, and deck building. I feel like the latter two do not get any form of respect, or very much at all in my opinion, and it's seen as cheesy the majority of the time, when really I think that there's a lot of skill in that, and Destiny is shifting more towards that than the first two, even though the first two inherently are always going to be important. I think that if you might be struggling with enjoying Destiny, or maybe even not, but shifting your mentality of Destiny being a core FPS game where shooting comes first, to a game that looks at all of these facets of skill that I mentioned, that is both abilities, interactions, mechanics, deck building, as well as fundamental FPS play, or as I call this to join it all in one, the card game FPS, it might help you a bit with your enjoyment of the game and how you approach it. But shifting your mentality about the game and the way you think about Destiny doesn't mean you have to just blindly enjoy things or like things and give no critical feedback, and it doesn't mean you're not allowed to dislike things either. The point that I'm trying to get across is Destiny is not just about fundamental FPS skill, and the game doesn't just revolve around that either. And the direction that Destiny is going and has been building up towards is this insane level of relative power. And when you're thinking about what your opinions are on how strong something is or isn't, you need to consider this relative power that's been established. That's pretty much our exotic weapons, stasis, top tree dawn blades, spectral blades, chaos reach now maybe, and whatever other abilities or classes fall into that strength. But of course there are going to be things that don't rise up to that aren't at that level, and maybe they need a buff, and maybe there are some individual abilities that in your opinion are too high, they're too hot for that relative level of power, so they need to be toned down. Whichever way, my point is I think Destiny is about that relative level of power now. It's not just about FPS fundamentals, it is about that level of strength across the board. And when I think if something's broken or not, I compare it to that relative level of power, in my opinion. And if these things, the shift from mechanical skill and decision making and FPS fundamentals to other skills as well, or maybe this relative level of power just is authentically not enjoyable for you, I do think unfortunately you should find another game that has what you value in it. I feel like I often see so many people still playing this game and complaining about different things that they might not like, and that's fair, everyone's allowed to, and you're always allowed to give an opinion, but I think it's very clear that this is the direction that Destiny's headed in, it's been headed in, and I don't think it's going anywhere. And I say this all from personal experience and what's worked for me. Like I said, I mentioned earlier, I've sat down with Cammy and talked about this, where if we're going to keep playing the game, we accept that this is the game now. This is where it's headed, this is the vision, and it's probably not going anywhere. And for me personally, I'm still really enjoying Destiny. I love all of the different crazy skills that come together in this game, and it's what makes it so fun to me. I love making new builds and thinking about how I can counter the meta or push it forward in some way through knowledge and, of course, mechanics mastery, knowing how to use my abilities well and at the right times, and knowing all the little things about damage numbers and resilience values and interactions between things like slowing a person stops them from shadow diving, as an example. And that layering on top of good fundamental FPS skill and mechanical skill to me is really fun, and I love every form of those skills, and I hope the community will perhaps gain a greater appreciation for all those types of skills and maybe where Destiny is or headed. And if not, like I said, maybe Destiny might not be the game for you anymore. I'm not sure, but to me it makes Destiny truly unique. Anyways, that was one hell of a rant. I hope it was at least somewhat cohesive. Thanks for listening to my opinions, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.